And now, coming to you live from the City of Angels, Los Angeles, California, it's the Sheena Metal Experience with your host, Sheena Metal, only on KGRA Digital Broadcasting.
Hi, and welcome to the Sheena Metal Experience on KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. I'm your host, Sheena Metal. I'm a psychic medium and an energetic healer. I'm an interfaith minister. I'm a 29-year talk radio host in Los Angeles and beyond. I'm a creative and a performing artist and also a paranormal survivor. And I come to you live from my home in Southern California every Friday at 3 o'clock Pacific time. This show is about spirituality, it's about creativity, it's about humanity, it's about passion, it's about service, it's about working to become and then being your best you in this big, beautiful world, and then encouraging others to do the same. And it may be my show. It is the Sheena Metal Experience, after all, but it's always and without a doubt your experience. My guest today is a wonderfully talented living historian who lives history in many different ways. Of all the ways, this is my favorite. He is part of putting on one of the largest Civil War reenactments west of the Mississippi, Civil War Days in Huntington Beach, California. He has done a living history for as a teacher, as a speaker, for film and for television and for commercials. And my favorite of all is when he puts on the Civil War outfit. As a small child, I don't remember a time in my life when I wasn't obsessed with Abraham Lincoln. So to fall into a family of Civil War people and to make a new wonderful friend and family member who is just as into Abraham Lincoln, maybe as me, is wonderful. And I'm so honored to have him here. The wonderful Darrell Rivers joins us. Hello, my friend. How are you?
I'm back with a different hat.
Yes, Darrell has been a part of the show talking about Santa Claus. It's my two favorite things, Darrell, Santa and Abraham Lincoln.
Santa and Lincoln. One day we will combine them.
That's one day in my Ascended Masters cabinet here. I will have a Santa statue and a Lincoln, and maybe I will put them together.
Yeah, I was talking about when I did my Santa lecture a few weeks ago. I was talking about how one of the first instances of Santa imagery comes through the engraving during the Civil War of an engraving of Santa handing out toys to the troops, and he's got like a red, white, and blue Santa meets Uncle Sam outfit on. So there is a crossover.
There is absolutely. And I think I sent you a picture yesterday of a purple Santa, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I want purple Santa. So I looked up purple Santa to see if I could find a statue of one. And of course, the first one I found had a Seattle Seahawks logo on it. So it was Seahawks Santa. It was like, have Santa help you root for your favorite team. And I'm like, maybe that's not the one for my Ascended Master cabinet, but I will find purple Victorian Santa if it's the last thing I do. Yeah, actually, any Santa. I started thinking after you did the show to talk about Santa, how really Santa is one of my spiritual heroes as well, and belongs in the Ascended Master cabinet alongside some pretty good company, alongside St. Nicholas, who I do have there.
Yep. And Lincoln.
And Lincoln, who I don't have there yet, but I will. I do not have a Lincoln there. I have Lincoln things, but I don't have a statue of Lincoln there. So that's something I'm working on. It's on the list. When I was little, Lincoln was my imaginary friend. And when I was alone by myself in the living room while my mom did her thing, I would put music on, usually Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, and because I was a strange child. And I would imagine that Lincoln would come and sit and talk to me. We still have the chair. We have one of those chairs. It's one of those, one of those high back covered chairs, very high. And I would imagine him sitting in that high back chair while I sat on the couch and talking to me about things. it wasn't until I was probably in college or even maybe in my later 20s that I realized that that the Lincolns, both Abraham and Mary Lincoln, were involved in paranormal stuff and were part of that craze of fascination in all things metaphysical and spiritual at that time. And I've always wanted to talk to you about this. And you've done my radio shows many times, and you've been here with me, but we've never discussed the paranormal aspect of the Lincolns' lives. And a lot of people think that it started right after he died, with Mary Lincoln looking to make contact with him. But the truth is, both of them, right, were doing seances when he was still alive, and he had many, precognitive things happen with him. I believe he was very gifted spiritually.
Yeah, I think Mary Lincoln's story with spiritualism and seances and all sorts of things, it's a very long story. It's a very interesting story. I think one of the things that really always speaks to me is spiritualism, the idea of communicating with the dead, and that link, between, that metaphysical link, is becomes really popular during the Civil War, for mainly because for the first time, families all over the United States are dealing with death. America has never had a war on the scale of the Civil War before. And so in 1861 all the way through 65, we have, there's more than 600,000 deaths. There are men that go missing that their families are never know,
Right.
whether
Yes.
they're dead or missing, or there's the wounded. But so many people are touched by the war, and so many people are looking for answers. And so the American spiritualism, which had started probably the 1840s, becomes really popular. And being a lady of the time, Mary Lincoln also gets really into it. And one of the, she loses two children. She loses Eddie and Willie, very young, and she eventually loses Tad in 1871. But during the Civil War, she has those tragic deaths before Abe passes. And so it's after Willie's death that she's really starts looking for answers,
Right.
and starts hosting those seances in the White House. She meets the Lauries, who were mediums, like they were mediums in Georgetown in DC. And there were a few different people that came through and offered their services, offered their opinions to Mary, and she had a bunch of different people she worked with, but the whole country was looking for answers. And I think that that's one of the the zeitgeist, the things that are happening to everyone in the U.S. at the time, was just everyone was dealing with death, and so many people dealt with it through spiritualism.
Yeah. I also think, and I talk about this a lot and have for years, that um, when the times change and human beings feel out of control, they tend to look for spiritual answers. And I think not only the Civil War, but also all through the Industrial Age, people began to feel very out of control by what the Industrial Age was bringing, right? Everything wasn't just, I'm baling hay. Now there were factories and other things were making your things for you. And people feel like, well, where do I fit in this big Industrial Age? And then the spiritualist movement becomes bigger and bigger. We saw that again at the turn of the 21st century with the technological age, right? Suddenly robots were taking people's jobs and everything was the internet. People begin to feel like, I don't understand. This is all moving so fast. I need answers. And then suddenly another whole wave of spiritual movement happens. So I do think that people are seekers, right? And people are looking when, and certainly a war, especially on your home soil. is something that makes you feel extremely out of control, and you're not getting the answers that you want from the earth. So you're looking for God or the beyond or spirits to bring in those answers for you, right?
And it was very specifically trying to communicate with people in their family who had died.
Yes.
Because I think one of the other big differences with the war dead is that for the first time, they're not passing at home surrounded by family.
Right.
These are people, men are dying far away from home. Families never know the story. They are looking for answers. And the same thing with Mary Lincoln, though she has, she doesn't go through the same experience as the rest of
Right.
the country, but she also was looking for answers. And I think a couple times people took advantage of that because she was
Oh,
just really very sad, just completely inundated. And I know there were a few. Um, I know she liked the seances, and there were a few mediums that she really enjoyed working with, but there were a few um, like charlatans
oh,
that
sure.
had done some sort of. I think I forget what his name is. It's Chesterfield, Chesterton, somebody. But he had he was a um, there isn't a good word for him other than a charlatan. He was a great
Yeah.
performer, walking around with a beard. With he, I think one of the accounts is that someone claimed to have sold him um, a sound making device later on because he could make like a banjo play from across the room or
Oh,
that, and
okay. So
so
he had a
a
whole
lot of that
show.
was a contraption, like a physical device,
Yeah.
rather than talking through any person. So I think a lot of people, that's really sad that people took advantage of Mary Lincoln. um, and a lot of people were really into it, and the fact that Abe was involved, I think, made him seem like more of a normal person. Um,
Yeah.
but it was controversial at the time too, because with everything, everyone thought there were some people that thought it was very odd
Yeah.
that she
That he
was doing
look
this, especially in the White House.
right, right, right. The haunted White House, right? That there's so many stories of people staying at the White House, even first families and second families visiting the White House and seeing people from the past, and most prominently, I think the Lincolns. People see the Lincolns there all the time, so there certainly is an energetic presence of the two of them there. Um, yeah, I think people were surprised that Abraham Lincoln was also a part of some of those seances. Certainly not as many as she was, but that he was a part of some of it, and that they were quote unquote hosting people at the White House to do these seances. Do you think that he generally was also looking for answers from his sons, or do you think that he just went along with it because she was so into it?
I think one of the lines that I really like that a lot of other people have said, other historians have said, is that they grieved in very different ways.
Hmm.
And so I think the seances in a lot of ways might have been humoring her, um, for her approach.
Right.
Um, a lot of his was solitude, and she definitely didn't want solitude, at least from him. And so
Right. Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest parts of the struggle between them, is that they grieve in different ways and they look for answers in different ways.
Mm.
And I know there are some comments um, that he wasn't against the idea, but he also has a lot of great folksy Lincolnisms with. I think he says that he only needs. Um, he basically says he only needs the old time religion. Doesn't need anything other than um, God and His Bible to uh, to look for answers. But
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Lincoln. Lincoln isn't. There's never a simple answer with Lincoln.
No, and I think also because of his melancholy and his depression, which we now know about, um, I think even with the way he dealt with the war, I think the horrors of the war that upset him, that his way was to internalize, to go quiet and to isolate. And I think when you're the first lady, whether you're the first lady today or 100 years ago or 300 years ago, 200 years ago, um, it's all the same thing, right? Your primary person is taking care of an entire country, and there's a lot of distraction. And during that time while you're in office, you kind of have to, in many ways, fend for yourself as far as that religion. I mean, excuse me, as far as that relationship. Now, a lot of first ladies have been in varying degrees of very active in what they did for the country, but still, in your primary relationship, there is so much stress and pressure on someone who is president that you have to sort of, you're in it on your own a little bit, right? There's places where you're just, you got to take care of yourself for that 8 years. In the case of Eleanor Roosevelt, almost 16. But so I think that there is sort of, so that if you are grieving and you are someone seeking answers and your husband is, taking care of a war and is not really there to be with you all the time, I think that level of grief and loneliness and a little bit of desperation, oftentimes people seek out some kind of clergy or somebody they think can give them answers. Now modern day, probably therapists. But back then there wasn't a lot of that. So if you felt funky, you went to your clergy or you sought out one of these people. And sometimes they probably were very good. I mean, like now, right? Sometimes they were good and sometimes they were snake oil salesmen. And the more powerful you are, the more you're going to attract the ones that want to put on a big show to get a lot of wealthy clientele.
And that's always what's missing from Civil War reenactments. We need a little bit of representation of these
Next year,
spiritualists and seances.
next year, my friend. Next year. That is my. I have found my reenacting desire.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea how they would actually pan out. I've never conducted a Victorian seance, but if we were going to, I wonder if Robert would be up for it.
I would imagine Robert is your Lincoln. I bet he would 100% be up for it. I bet his wife that he uses as Mrs. Lincoln would also be up for it. As a matter of fact, I believe I talked to her about that at your wedding reception, and she was very, very excited. And actually, so was he at the idea.
Because I think that is exciting, and I talk about this whenever I talk about reenactments, is I love people portraying something they're passionate about. And we do a lot of running around with guns and shooting cannons, and we get to portray that. But I think it's very interesting when you have someone portray a different walk of life. We have our chaplains, we have our blacksmiths,
Yes.
we have our doctors, we have
Yes.
all kinds of different. This last year there was a temperance league, making sure no one was drinking.
Yeah.
And now we need some spiritualists.
Don't you think? And if there was a little spiritualist booth where you could come by and get a little reading, and then maybe we could do a seance with the Lincolns as an activity.
Yeah, because I do think it's genuinely a very interesting part of the history of the war. Just the spiritualism, but also just talking about how all of these families dealt with grief and dealt with crisis
Yes.
that they hadn't encountered previously.
Yes. Yes.
It's something that happens to the entire country, and they're dealing with it, and then after they're dealing with it, becomes very popular after the Civil War too, or
Yes.
especially after the Civil War, because they're still trying to find answers with their fallen relatives. So
Absolutely. Yes. And I especially think that it's I mean, there's so many varying degrees of what it looked like, the different kinds of spiritualists that they went to, from people they were seeing very quietly who was giving them answers, to these big grandiose productions, like you said, with the banjo that played across the room, and the device that slammed the windows open and closed, and the ladies working the thing with their knees that are making the lampshades fly off. And it's and I think that it's for a country that was founded by religious fundamentalists, and that ethic of that Puritanism still carries on this many hundreds of years later from them, into everything we do as Americans. At that time, when there was not really any alternate spirituality. Now, there were people who probably on the down low practice a little hoodoo, a little voodoo, a little witchcraft, but it was not known. You didn't pick up the paper and there was, hey, there's a psychic and we're all talking about it. So for these people to come in, and for this country where most people, like Lincoln, right, their religion was kind of an earthy, down home Christianity, for them to suddenly decide, I'm going to go see a psychic, that's a tremendous leap from
And
what they
host
knew
it in the
before.
White House.
What?
And host the event in the White
And
House.
at the White House.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's when did that, when has that happened since then? Although I remember the uproar that Nancy Reagan had an astrologer, and the uproar that Hillary Clinton had a psychic in the White House. I mean, and then we're talking 100 and something years later, and it was, oh, shocky. So I can imagine at that time, there were probably some. I mean, I think if I'm going to reenact this next year for Civil War Days, I think we should have some fundamentalist ladies that protest.
Yeah.
They should protest outside of my booth, and
they need to be very close.
God and bang their Bibles. You know what I mean? Because I think there probably was that, which is why I think a lot of folks slid off to those places on the sly, which is why then suddenly now it's in the White House, and it's not a secret anymore. I think it was very brave of the Lincolns to do that.
Yeah, it was certainly interesting. They had, I think, 8 seances. Most of them were in the Red Room.
Wow.
And I think there was controversy even at the time about the newspaper articles on them, because I'm not sure all the articles were published by people that were actually there in any way.
Right.
I think a lot of it was very embellished, but
Sure.
yeah, it did happen in the White House.
Wow. Now, have you ever read anything that has indicated whether or not Mary Lincoln received any of the answers that she was seeking?
I only remember, and I was hoping we would get Robert on here, so it wasn't all on me, and I could have just nodded along. But the only thing that I remember is after Abraham died, I think she claimed to be able to feel his presence in some of these seances. I'm not sure about the ones that were actually held in the White House. And speaking of the feeling of the presence, there's also, before I forget, there's the photographs. Have you ever seen the photograph?
Yes.
Because it was a guy named Mumler, and he claimed to be a spirit photographer.
Very popular at the time. Spirit photography, huge at the time.
Which we've done at in the reenactment, because it's very easy to do if you know how to do them. With you just do the light exposure on the plate, and then you go and take the photograph again, and you got double things. And even though this guy was very much outed as a fraud, Mary Lincoln still went to him in I think the 1870s, and there's that famous photo of Lincoln's hands on Mary Lincoln. But I think that that was another one of those ones that was really taking advantage of her grief.
Yes, 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 I agree. But I mean, spirit photography has, I guess, neither been proven nor 100% disproven. There are many photos that have been disproven. It's like all the photos from that time period with the ectoplasm, right, where you would see the people. Have you seen those?
I've seen water droplets accidentally get on the plate.
Well, that was a whole thing, and there was a very
Yeah,
famous spirit photographers that did it, and very famous trans medium. So a trans
yeah,
medium obviously is a medium that allows the spirit to come inside their physical body. Trans mediums that were known for, you could see the spirits coming out of their mouth, and they
mm,
could with the ectoplasm, right? It looked like they
yeah,
were, giving birth to a cloud. And those were very popular at the time. But we liked strange things at the time, right?
yeah.
Families
And
took
there
pictures
were
with,
it was a brand new technology,
right,
and a lot of even when you do them today, there are a lot of weird um, shapes and things
yes,
that happen in the photography, and but at least we do know how Mumler was doing it with the
right.
double exposure.
And
So
now
there,
it's the
so
right
at
now,
least there might be some weird things in some photographs, but I think at least Mumler was
yeah,
um, being a bit of a fraud.
right, right, yeah. I mean, there
Because
was a fact.
I think it's without it, the spirit photography itself, I think it is a very cool concept
Hmm.
that you're able to, make a ghost person, um, as a memory, that you have the memory of this
Right.
person as a ghost right next to you or behind you. Um, that's a cool photograph anyway.
Well,
Um,
and certainly there was that fascination at that time period, right, where families were literally photographing themselves in family portraits with the dead relatives, the
mm,
body of the dead relative, to go one step further into here's the spirit that
yeah,
has gone to heaven and now has come back to take the photo. Um, I think it's just one step further, right? It's one step more into the metaphysical.
yeah.
And I think people would have loved it even if they had known it wasn't real. But the idea that it was real, I would imagine a lot of people, Mary Lincoln included, paid a pretty penny for those photographs to have that. But you don't know if there's ever any, if you've ever read anything about if she ever felt like she contacted the boys or got
Oh,
any.
I think she did. I think she did. I remember specifically the thing about Lincoln's presence.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, because that's right. Because then after he passed, she went back all over again, and then it was all about contacting him.
Yeah.
And that
And
was something she did right up till the end, right?
yeah. And I mean, her struggle gets harder and harder as the years go on.
Yes.
She really becomes very depressed after Lincoln's death, and then, even more so than previous. And then in 1871, Tad dies at 18. He's
Mm.
very sickly. We don't know exactly what he died from, but um, he died at 18, and so she goes, just completely loses it. Um, and as it's this is one of the big controversies of the time, because you start to have the rise of sanitariums and, more clinical mental hospitals. And
Yes.
so Robert Lincoln has her committed,
Mm.
against her will for quite a while. She ends up actually um, getting out and having all these like testimonials that she's fine, and she goes and travels the world. But it's she's almost um, told she's crazy for her quest, for her
Yeah.
looking for answers and being lost and being depressed, and she's just told she's crazy.
And that was very much the time, right? And not to get too feminist or too political, but it's a historical fact that at the time, if women had extreme emotions, they were considered troubled, and any woman that had opinions that were not popular, and a lot of Mary Lincoln's opinions were not popular, they were considered out of control, hysterical. And then the next thing you knew, some family member would check them into a hospital, and it would become an ongoing problem. And unlike her, most of those people never got out. I mean, and a lot of those people were women. I
I
mean,
mean, there's an advantage to being the former first lady.
yes, right. You get a break. A lot of those women's husbands checked them into institutions because they wanted to marry new wives. I
Yeah.
mean, it was a thing at the time that if or if you had any beliefs that somebody didn't like. I mean, I'm sure that there was a time where if one of my ultra conservative neighbors in this neighborhood I grew up in and live in again 30 years ago could have come and seen all my mom's dragons and fairies, they would have called, and the little men with the nets would have come for her. I mean, it was anything that was different. Um, and I wonder if how Mary Lincoln being very open about alternative kinds of spirituality that she believed in, how that helped to help other people, women, men too, to feel like their interest in that was okay. Because
And I
certainly,
think that's a huge part of the story, is that whatever happened, she did popularize it
yes,
and normalized it.
yes,
And
and,
yeah,
and
her struggle is very it's very public. I mean, she has public letters between Queen Victoria and herself about, their shared struggle with grief. Um, and she sounds it's sad that she's just lambasted as she's just this crazy lady.
right,
But
which
a lot of the stories sound so normal, not normal, but like things that a lot of people deal with.
yeah,
She's a horrible spendthrift. Um, she, she buys a lot of stuff,
yeah,
and she had a pretty big estate from Abraham, but then also got a first lady's pension granted to her by Congress. That was, I think, $3,000 a year, and but she spent a lot of money, and she did as first lady, and I think that never stopped.
sure,
So um, the what do we call that? The retail therapy. Um, but then she also just had horrible manic moments. She thought people were trying to poison her. She accused people of stealing from her. Um, all sorts of things, that were just part of her struggle.
yeah, yeah, yes. And how much of that do you think was really that she had mental illness, and how much of that do you think that she was just a different kind of personality for a lady at the time?
I don't know. I couldn't speak to that,
She
but
was very kind of balls to the wall, and she was very opinionated.
yeah,
And
and I think she was dealing with a lot. She lost two. I think anyone would be very affected losing children.
yes,
It was very, very common at the time, but especially losing children, between at those young ages.
hmm,
Eddie was almost 4, um, so I think that really affected her. And then, having her husband killed in front of her, everyone just says, "Oh, she was crazy and she was horrible to him, and then she was crazy afterward." But the story is so much more complex than that, and I think if that happened today, we would be a lot more sympathetic. But we just kind of repeat those 1890s opinions on Mary Lincoln.
yeah, I agree. I agree. And I also think that sometimes, and I think we've seen this with um, many widows of presidents, when the president is gone, we don't quite know what to do with the first lady, right? We're not quite sure, because here's a person who um, was a very powerful person in that office. Now they no longer hold that office, and we're not quite sure what to do with them. I mean, in the same way that I think that happens with presidents and first ladies who are just no longer in office. Um, I remember hearing once a panel, and I want to say that it was I think it was George Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton, who became very good friends later in life, talking about how you just kind of it's like one minute you're like the leader of the free world, and the next minute it's like, oh, that guy, what do we do with him? And I think that happens with first ladies as well as presidents. I think if you're widowed in office, it's even worse, because I mean, I think we all saw that in film footage. We didn't with Mary Lincoln, but we saw it with Jacqueline Kennedy, where, whose husband was also shot right in front of her, where one minute she's, freaking out in the car and holding his head. The next minute she's there while they're swearing in Lyndon Johnson. And then it's like, okay, well, are you going to move out your stuff? Because we're moving in. And where do you go? So I think it's at that time in the early 1960s, there was more talk about it. There was more support of it. There were more interviews. There was film footage. There were ways people could identify with her. But I think in Lincoln's time, we just sort of were so busy shuffling the next regime in that I don't think they quite knew what to do with her. And I think that is a thing that happens, and will continue to happen. It's just the nature of humanity, I think, that we're on to the next. But wait, they're still part of the old team here. Well, figure it out. Here's your pension. Go do it. Get out of your house. You gotta go. New lady's coming in. I think that must be very terrifying, on top of dealing already with your husband's death, and on top of when he was alive, going through a war with your husband, who is the president, a war where the country is divided, and there are many people whose opinions are not the same as yours, and there are people, friends and relatives you've acquired in life that might not have believed in your side. They might believe in the other side, and it was a strange time for every human being in America. I can imagine a very difficult time when there were many people that blamed him and subsequently her for the war itself.
Yeah, she really got it from. This is becoming the Mary Lincoln show.
I know, right?
This is
Okay.
that might be your other impression.
Well, that's always my impression, but
she really got it from all sides, because she had family in the South, she had relatives that fought on the other side, and yet she is the staunch abolitionist, and she was involved in abolition before Lincoln, and then she's alongside Abraham, and even in government circles, she's controversial for spending so much money, because she moves into the White House and it's falling apart, and trying to keep up, even though she's seen as the prairie primitive. The She's just controversial from every side, but
yeah,
there's a lot of good to Mary Lincoln.
yeah, I agree. I think she's groovy, and I think that she was bold to be public about what she did with the Sanses. Do you know anything about if I mean, are there any accounts that you have found of anybody who attended any of those, who had some kind of they were contacted, my person came and contacted me? I mean, were they popular? Did people want to come back? Do you think some people went just for the shock value of, oh my God, let's find out what this is about?
I think they were very private events. I know they had the lorries, but I don't know a lot of who was there and what happened, actually.
Right. Right.
That's sad.
Do you think they were mostly friends, or do you think, do you think journalists would have been invited? I mean, at the time, is it something that was very locked down? So if you weren't a friend, you knew it happened from the word of mouth, but you didn't really know what happened, or were any?
Yeah, I mean, the Red Room isn't that big, but they, I think it was not a big event, and that's why it's so controversial with a lot of the newspaper articles, because a lot of the people weren't there, but they
Right.
hear that there was this event, so they went and just made up a lot of it.
Sure, sure. And what about Lincoln and his own gifts? Because he certainly, I mean, we talk a lot now about people being empaths, right? I mean, he certainly was, I believe, a big part of his melancholia was the fact that he was an empath. And I believe that during the war, he was empathically feeling the energy of what was going on in the country. And it was like it does with empaths, it was viscerally affecting his emotional and his physiological operating systems. Like it was in there, and it was a lot. You know what I mean? It wasn't just like,
Yeah.
this is bad and I'm sorry people are dying and this is terrible, but he was really kind of living it and feeling it. And I think that had to do with his own spiritual gifts.
I mean, he's very good at reading people. But yeah, he certainly takes it all on himself, um, in terms of all the different happenings of the war. He gets um, very emotionally invested in
Yeah.
everything, and just like every president, it takes its toll
Yeah.
mentally, emotionally, spiritually.
Yes. My mom used to say they all go white the first year.
Yeah.
And I think it's the stress of it. Now, what about one of my favorite stories is when he had the dream, right? And he woke up in the middle of the night and was walking through the White House, and he literally saw a casket and asked somebody, whose casket is that? And somebody said the president has been shot, right? Did I
Well,
get
this
that
is
story
this
right?
is where the greatest crossover of all time could happen. It's like Scrooge.
I was just gonna say as I was saying it, it reminded me of the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come.
Yeah.
Do you think maybe Dickens knew that story?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's Christmas carols before Lincoln, so Lincoln would have known that story.
Oh, Christmas Carol is
Yeah,
earlier than that?
so maybe Lincoln read Christmas Carol.
Oh, maybe he
Mm,
did.
mm,
Or maybe he legit had that dream.
yeah. No, he has a lot of different dreams too. There's the one that they mention in the movie Lincoln with him on top of the train going over the ocean, where he's just traveling towards the light.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and then Mary has lots of dreams and
Yeah.
lots of people trying to interpret her dreams for her.
Yes. 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 And the two of them, very, very spiritually gifted people. Did I get that story right about where he had the dream that there was the coffin in the White
I
House?
think so. I think so.
Um, uh, and then he had another thing, right? On the night that he was going to the Ford Theater, he had a strange feeling where he didn't want to go. Not like, oh my God, I'm going to get shot, but just this feeling like he wanted to kind of be anyplace else but there.
Well, this is where I feel really bad about forgetting this guy's name, because there was the charlatan guy, I believe, was friends with John Wilkes Booth and was trying to warn Lincoln, um, that like and Lincoln had talked about people warning him to be careful.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so it's all connected.
Yeah. Yeah. An innocent time, right? Where everybody thought, oh, the war's over and we won. So everything's great.
Yeah.
It didn't occur to anybody that there would be the level of repercussions that there were so quickly, where the president would become assassinated by,
Well,
a
he has
crazy.
his one bodyguard. He just doesn't have a secret service yet.
Right. Well, wasn't his
Yeah.
bodyguard like his best friend?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Slept
that's a
outside
good
his
bodyguard.
door. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I just think that I think it's a fascinating topic, and I think it's something that I'm going to study more, and maybe you will too, and we can do a follow up with more stories of it all, um, because I just think what spiritual pioneers those two were for that time, and bold to come out and be open about it at a time where the country could have, showed up with the pitchforks and the torches.
Yeah. And this is one of those topics that I've now reached the point where I know how much I don't know.
Yeah, me too.
So we're
Yeah, but
so
that's the nice
this
thing
is
about
gonna
us.
it's gonna have to be revisited. But the concept I think is so interesting, and hopefully that can be something that we teach people more about. Is that the grief and the dealing with a crisis
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
and
And
getting those answers from the Civil War soldiers.
and working to get those answers. Yeah. And how
Yeah,
important spiritualists and psychics were to that time, and why there needs to be one at Civil War days.
that's true. I
You and
mean, I would
Busky
like to see the standard crystal ball, but I don't know if that's
I
that's the
would I
same as
would
the seance,
for that I would bring the crystal ball.
just
And
for fun.
I don't know if you know that I would bring the Victorian tarot cards. There are
Mm,
cards that look like they looked then. They're repercussions of reproductions of those. And you can get things that are, as a matter of fact, I belonged for many years to a Victorian seance group that was so old that it was the things that we did were pre the spirit board even. And I have a friend who makes the tools that were used at Victorian seances.
yeah, it is a part of Victorian culture.
Yes,
It's very interesting.
yes, it's fantastic. You are wonderful, my friend. Where can people find you? What are you doing? And will you come back and we'll do something fun again? I'd love it.
Yeah, we'll always talk about something. Our reenactment is hbhistory.org, and we're gonna have every year we have in the spring is American Revolution with no beards and George Washington, and then we grow our beards back and we have the Civil War Labor Day weekend in September with Lincoln. And then if you want to follow on Instagram, it's Lord Rivers, always doing something historical.
I love that. Thank you for being here, my friend. I appreciate you.
Of course.
Wonderful, wonderful Darrell Rivers, everybody. It's always a joy to talk to him about so many exciting things. And this was our first time talking about the paranormal, and I love that story. Come back and we'll talk more about the paranormal and other things. If you miss those links, you can find me at sheenametalspiritual.com and on social media everywhere at Sheena Metal. That's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and X, formerly Twitter. Also, please send me a text message if you want to be in touch. 818-437-0886. Until I see you next time, seek peace, live in love, lead with kindness, embrace unity, always work to raise your vibration and the vibration of the everything. And remember that you are love and you are loved and you're so loved by me. And I so love doing this today. And I love the show. Thanks to KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network and my wonderful program director, Bill Forte. And thank you to my amazing engineer and producer, Emery, who is truly the wind beneath my wings. Let the Lincolns be your guide and set an example for you. Don't be afraid to investigate the things in the paranormal world and the spiritual world that interest you. If you believe in something, if you want to try to locate a loved one, if you are interested in candle magic or learning about ancient Celtic paganism or whatever your story is, don't be afraid that others will judge you for it. Be who you are and explore. We are put on this earth to find our spiritual way, to walk our life path, to walk our spirit path. And part of that is just discovering who we are. And that's completely okay. That's how it is. And think about that. All right. Till I see you next Friday at 3:00 Pacific time. I love you all. Namaste. And I hope you have a great